Chapter 37 Trickery, Mockery. Deaton put his baton up just in time to block the sword swinging towards him. The Oni swung again, but was blocked once more. The two of them kept on with that exchange, hitting, dodging, and blocking, until a third element perturbed the balance of it. A second Oni spawned out of thin shadow ribbons behind Deaton. The man was barely holding his own against one demon. He knew he wouldn't last long with two at his throat. He held his metal baton up in a horizontal orientation in order to stop the sword from slicing him into two halves. The creature threatening him from behind, however, had a green light to act. It took momentum, getting ready to puncture through his spine. Thankfully, Lydia's strong vocal cords were there to fall back on, and she sent the Oni flying backwards, sparing Deaton's life in the process. When she saw that he could most likely handle the things from there, she made a swift turn around herself to see Liam busy clawing his way through another demon's chest. Both Malia and Rosalie were involved in fights of their own and looked like they were fine off. Mason was emptying his gun inside an enemy's guts. He was shortly after backed up by Corey, who made himself visible again to the human eye. He stood behind the Oni and bonked it with his own gun to its head, hard enough to send it to the ground on its side. "Everyone, come on!" Melissa screamed from inside the room where Stiles lied. She had had the genius idea to disperse mountain ash powder all around the inside of the room, knowing that the creatures couldn't spawn inside once sealed. She thought it would give them some time to think of a better plan. Everyone scrambled her way, doing their best to shake their opponents off. How long will it last? Asked Stilinski once they were all inside the temporary safe zone. "Not sure, but I wouldn't count on it for very long." The reply came from Melissa as she spread the powder across the threshold to seal the barrier. "Do you think the others are—" Rosalie began to ask, but trailed off. "Do I think the others are also fighting? Well, definitely, but I wouldn't worry about them if I were you," retorted Malia. Rosalie seemed to be accepting of that response way too easily for Mason's taste. "What do you mean by not to worry about them? If they're attacked by these things, I'm pretty sure there's a lot of worrying to be done." The lights began to flicker on and off restlessly. That was when Liam realized something, or the absence of someone that should have been with them. "Wait, where's Alec?" "What do you mean? He's standing right there." Lydia pointed at one of the corners in the room, confused by Liam's question. "Where?" "Lydia, I don't see anybody there," replied Liam. We can't see him either, if that means anything," added Melissa. There was nobody else there indeed. Only Lydia's eyes were seeing him. She turned her head slightly to the side and... "Jordan?" she muttered when she saw Parrish. She kept on turning. "Malia? Peter?" Her slow pivoting became frantic. "Derek? Scott?" She wasn't murmuring anymore. Then she stopped dead in her motion, shocked. "Stiles?" she uttered. With the exception of Malia, everyone around Lydia seemed lost. When she said Stas's name, however, they all turned to him on the bed. "What the hell?" Sheriff Stilinski muttered. Lydia directed her attention towards the bed as well by then. "Where is he? Where is Stiles?" Stiles was no longer lying down. In fact, he was nowhere to be in that room. None of the others that Lydia saw seconds before were either. They all vanished the same way they'd appeared, because they were never there. He realized it was all nothing but a banshee premonition. Where was Stiles? Stiles staggered along the hospital hallway, only one purpose in mind. What was his purpose? Whenever he tried to think about it clearly in his head, it all seemed so blurry. Why was he heading towards the roof, after all? No way to grasp that. He just felt the urge to. As he moved, He didn't seem to encounter any human soul. Before he could wonder about the reasons for that, he had already made it to the highest floor, and something else caught his attention. Words around him, on posters, patient files near their room entrances, and warning signs along his way. He could read them all. "Am I still dreaming?" he muttered to himself. "Why don't you find that out on your own?" An unpleasantly familiar voice whispered behind him, so close that he could feel their breath on the back of his neck. His only way of putting any kind of distance between them two was to push open the rooftop door and throw himself out under the still dark sky. He wondered if he was contemplating the real sky or if he was still stuck in his nightmare. He pondered about the thought that the night was stretching beyond its own time, but then his mind became preoccupied by something else. A silhouette standing right by the edge. She looked like she was ready to jump. Was she a patient? She was certainly dressed like one. However, Stiles froze in astonishment when he thought he recognized her. "Mom?" he mouthed with a shaky voice. Chapter 38. King of Hearts. Scott approached the creature ahead of him, without reluctance but apprehensive nonetheless. That abomination, on the other hand, stood its ground, very confident. "Matt?" uttered Scott once he thought he got close enough to the thing. "Scott?" Matt said in a taunting manner. "Glad to know you haven't forgotten about me," he added. "I wish I could do that," Scott admitted under his breath. "You're an alpha now. Congratulations, by the way." Every word out of Matt's mouth felt calculated and planned for the only purpose to push Scott's buttons. Not that it would be surprising. In a way, the only thing that hadn't changed about him was just that, his attitude. Everything else seemed almost too foreign, though his eyes bore the same cold mass of hatred they'd always displayed. The only exception was that then it was pretty apparent. "I see you upgraded too," Scott attempted. Matt ignored that remark and transferred his attention onto Chris, who was standing a few steps behind Scott. The man clutched at his weapon with a little more intensity than he liked to admit. "Argent, still alive? Unlike the rest of your family," he mocked him. Chris tensed up even more than he already had upon hearing those words. Matt knew where it hurt, and he clearly enjoyed pressing on that sore spot. Nobody said anything, Matt decided to add. "I hear your father had been wreaking havoc around the world." "I wish he was still alive," he pouted. "And why is that?" Chris finally spoke. "Well, you know, I kinda owe him for last time." "You're here for revenge. You're a little too late. As you said, he's dead." "Yeah, I saw. Well, you know, we gotta make do with what we have." Matt cracked a malevolent smile at the end of his sentence. It announced the colors of his intentions to Scott and Chris. The latter didn't wait for invitation. He swiftly lifted his weapon, aimed, and shot Matt right near the heart end. And nothing happened. Matt didn't move, didn't stumble backwards, and certainly didn't fall to his death a second time as expected after that shot. "Bullets laced with mountain ash? Really?" The previously malicious smile Matt offered slowly morphed into a devious giggle. Scott seemed as shocked as Chris by the facts. They stood transfixed, watching the hole in the creature's chest refill itself, regenerating cell by cell before their very eyes, quicker than it had been created. Braden had shared the information about the bullets needed to take the Longtails down, wondering why those didn't work on him would need to wait. Matt had stopped laughing. "Well, no, I wish I could stay longer for some more idle chit-chat, but kinda got a job to do and I don't want to fail." "What job?" Scott tried with him again. You see, I am the new recruit. I don't want to turn out. He appeared to be searching for his words before he finally finished his sentence. Disappointing. And with that, he lifted his forearm and flicked his finger in the direction of Chris. Neither of them anticipated the next thing, not even Scott. One of the extra long tails who had been lurking around them for a while crashed into Chris, sending him a few feet away from where he originally stood. The creature then turned towards Scott, picked him up by the throat, and slammed him to the ground as hard as its power allowed it to. It held him down in place, allowing Matt to walk forward. He stopped near Scott's head, towering over him. I did not have that kind of power last time we met, or how tables have spun and spun around. Didn't do anything to you. The Alpha struggled to push the words out past his tightly held jaw. What was that? Oh, but you did. You stood in my way. We all know how that ended. What are we supposed to do? Let you kill innocent people? Innocent? Innocent? Of course you'd say that. Perfect Scott McCall. You know, she was right. You haven't changed one bit. She? Wondered Scott. But again, Matt ignored his question and turned towards Chris, who was still trying to regain his senses after what the creature had put him through. He strolled his way dangerously, and Scott knew what was on his mind. Matt was planning to finish him off. It was then that Scott found the imperishable strength to grab the large hand squeezing his throat and breaking the bones holding it together in a loud and painful crack. His facial expression had nothing of the confusion exhibited a few minutes earlier to that. Eyes flashing red, and with sheer determination, he kicked the long tail away from himself. He ran towards Matt, who dodged him a little too easily. He seemed to have all of the time in the world to simply move aside, as Scott jumped forward in an attempt to reach Matt. The werewolf landed on his feet first, and his knees second. Damn, you're slow for an alpha, Matt stated simply. And a true alpha at that, he mocked further. How did you do that? Asked Scott, remaining in that position. What? Matt feigned ignorance for a moment before he continued. Oh, you mean this? He said, before holding his hand up and plunging it hard into his own chest, braving through the layers of skin, flesh, muscle, and bones like there were none. But that was not the most impressive thing about it. As he did that, he simply stood there, barely reacting to what was happening to his own body. It was as if that man, that creature, had never even heard of the concept of pain. But Scott could think of nothing to do but gawk at the pure insanity he was witnessing. After all the crazy things he'd seen. Surprised? He spoke again, retrieving his hand from his own torso, only for it to grow whole again before Scott's eyes. See? Shooting or stabbing you through the heart does nothing to me. I am what you can call the King of Hearts. Chapter 39. Uriella. Parrish only became aware of his lowering body temperature when he finally realized he was shivering. He'd spent heavens knew how long in that square cube of nothingness, wondering how many minutes, hours, or perhaps even days had passed with him still trapped. He noticed that the dull walls surrounding him were being increasingly covered in frost and ice. Their once repulsive yellow color was then starting to turn into a shimmering snow white. Oh, if only that meant a good thing, at least. No. Instead, Parrish was more and more coming to terms with his imminent death. He saw himself freeze out of commission. Although he knew the hellhound part of him would be just fine, he was already mourning the other part, however, the life of Jordan Parrish. He wondered what kind of world and what would it look like when, or if, he'd ever be set free from his ice shell again. How long would it even take for that to happen? Centuries? He remained in that crouched position, hands tight around his own arms, in a vain attempt at prolonging the freezing process. Perhaps it was the silence that would drive him insane before anything else killed him. All he could hear and there was his intense and desperate breathing rhythm. Lovely, isn't it? Or perhaps he wasn't going to go insane. A faint and soft voice reached his eardrums. Without much consideration, he responded. What's so lovely? He grunted between his teeth, the cold becoming less and less bearable by the second. Oh, the sight of you dying, of course, she said, sounding a tad louder than the first time she spoke. I can't recognize your voice, he managed. Don't fret much, dear. You don't know me. She kept quiet for a moment before adding, We don't want you exhausting the last of your energy that fast. Not before we get to chat, that is. You're enjoying this, aren't you? He tried to sound determinate, or the least bit threatening, but his lungs were struggling to work, and it all came out in severed huffs. Shouldn't I? It's not every day I get to witness the spark of a hellhound flame out. It's such a rare thing, you see, even for somebody like me. Will you at least tell me who you are? He asked. Such a shame, too. I really liked you, but we had to take you out first. I'm sure you understand we can't have a hellhound pulling our whiskers if we want to get some real work done around here. She'd completely ignored his query. Parrish expected it. She wasn't just going to answer all of his questions, not without stringing him along, at the very least. And so, he decided to follow her flow. You liked me. Even you said that I didn't know you. I said you didn't know me. I never said I didn't know you. Are you going to tell me who you are before I die, at least? I can tell, or I can show you. Through her words, Parrish had the feeling that she was some sort of an old soul, like she was from a completely different era, something about the way she spoke and the tone she picked with him. Why aren't you going to look? She snapped him out of his thoughts. Rummaging through his own deep sea of contemplation, he'd missed the fact that she was standing right beside him. He craned his neck upwards with much difficulty to see her. In many ways, she seemed familiar to him, as though, on one hand, like he'd known her for quite a long time, but on the other, like he'd only recently met her. Her gorgeous titanium white hair extended down to her lower back, thin and loose but voluminous nonetheless. Her eyes bore a fierce and piercing look, as hard as a diamond. The consistency wasn't all they had from that precious stone. Her eyes did look like diamonds, shining gray. He wondered if her skin had always been of that color, or if she'd looked more human once upon a time. Unnaturally pale as a sheet, she was, that woman. Who are you? He attempted again with that question. I am somebody's daughter. Used to be somebody's sister. And She put emphasis on the word used in her statement, and she was about to proceed before he cut her off. You are a banshee, he uttered, more so terrified than he wanted to sound. Well, mostly, she admitted plainly. Can I get a name? The words escaped his mouth before he could do anything about it. Why did he ask her in such a friendly tone? He'll never understand. Whatever use would you have for my name? None, he quietly muttered. Uriella, that is my name. Chapter 40. Once a killer, always a killer. It's weird. I think I can't hear anything. Can you? Asked Peter, half frantically looking to both his left and right. He was walking as he spoke, but when no response came from his daughter, he quickly stopped moving and turned around, only to see that he was left there completely alone, no living sign of Malia whatsoever. Malia? He questioned, panic rising through his guts. Malia, where are you? He demanded in a more desperate tone. That did him no good, since Malia still was a no-show. He flashed his eyes blue to gleam the area around himself, in hopes that he could perhaps catch a glimpse of anything at all. At that moment his fears won him over, and he wasn't only thinking of Malia in particular. He was ashamed to admit it, but at that instant he truly only wanted to feel another presence by his side. Something the matter, Peter? He froze upon hearing her voice. He never thought he'd ever hear it again, if not only in his head from time to time when he reminisced on the old days. Talia? He uttered in shock, unable to turn around, unable to face her. For many reasons. He couldn't get himself to look his late sister in the eye, not after all of the nefarious things he'd done years after her extinction, to his own family. Isn't this what you wanted, little brother? She asked condescendingly. No, I didn't want, I wanted none of this. He stuttered his words out the best he could. Well, did you think that this day would never come? Did you really think you could escape the consequences of your own doings? Where is Malia? Where's my daughter? Malia? So you found your daughter after all. That poor child. She could have gone several lifetimes without ever needing to know who her father was. Shut up, he screamed in a mix of anger and plea. I did my best to protect her from you. It seems to me that my best wasn't enough, she said. You took her away from me. Can you really blame me for that? Could he really blame her for that? For protecting his own child from him? He'd always wondered how different things could have been if Talia never took that memory away from him. Perhaps Malia would have perished in that fire like the rest of his family. He immediately shook that thought away, but he couldn't shake his sister's words off. When he'd laid eyes on her, he realized that he had already turned around, and when he did finally get a chance to take a good look at her, he thought of many things. He thought her traits had hardened. He thought her eyes had darkened. In the midst of all of that, he thought that he'd missed her. Was she even real? Never mind that, he couldn't focus on such questions, for his guilt flooded all and any part of his being. He began to remember all of the cool words he'd spoken in her regards, both to her face and behind her back. How he'd relentlessly tried to take the leadership of the clan from her, only because he thought he was entitled to such power. How he'd always undermined her authority and looked down on her ways, believing she was making them weak in the eyes of the enemy. What happened to them after that? Well, this might not be what you wanted, but it sure as hell is what you deserve. She cut his cogitations short. Total and utter loneliness, she added. Right then, he felt a tight hand grip at his ankle. His eyes instinctively darted down, startled by how freezing that touch was. Odd, since said hand made contact with his jeans, and yet he felt like it was locked right onto his bare skin. That wasn't the end of it. He lost all control over his breathing when he realized who it was, crawling on the cold, hard ground. Laura? His voice trembled. Her right hand hooked around his leg. She managed to glare at him beneath all the dirt, filth, and unkempt hair covering her face. He stumbled a few steps back before falling on his behind, his back sustained by a large tree trunk. "Did you miss me, Uncle Peter?" she said in an unhinged tone. She strained her arms to pull her weight forward. She had no legs to do so. Her body simply stopped where her lower back was supposed to be. She crawled closer and closer to him, dragging her hanging insides along with her as she moved. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Laura." He apologized profusely between his breaths. He shook in his spot as the memories of what he did to his own niece on the night of a full moon bulldozed any other aspect of thought in his mind. "I don't want your apology." "What did you do to me?" Laura demanded ragingly. "What did you do to my daughter?" Talia yelled out. "What did you do?" She screamed louder. "I killed her. I killed her," he cried. "Killer? Once a killer, always a killer," Laura berated him. "Again. Say it again." They both howled, their shrieking echoed loud in his head. It had gotten so bad that he had to put his hands over his ears. "I killed her. I did. I'm sorry. I'm sorry," he repeated and repeated like a broken record. "What the hell are you talking about, Peter? Peter, it's me. Wake up." That was another familiar voice, but his brain couldn't process it fast enough, not even when he was in that state. What did they mean by wake up? "Peter," the voice called out to him again. "Come on, I think I found a way out," it said. After a few more seconds stuck in that condition, he felt a moderately strong blow to the side of his face and finally decided to look up. "Malia? Is it really you?" he pleaded. "Yes," she answered that a tad bit too fast. "What do you mean?" she added. I thought... He tried, but she spoke again. "We were walking and you freaked out all of a sudden. You forget it now. I think I found a way out. Look over there." She pointed towards an enlightened gap in the middle of the dark gown that covered that entire world. He saw it, and he saw that there was no Talia or Laura around him. Just him and Malia, crouched on her knees in front of him. It was then that he realized that all of it was nothing but an illusion, a trick designed to mess with his mind, with his feelings. He felt a tug on his arm. Malia was urging him to stand back up in order for them to run towards the gleam of hope a few dozens of feet ahead of them. So they ran in its direction like there was no tomorrow for them. They leapt, throwing their bodies onto what they believed was the exit from that hellhole. They crashed on a hard wooden surface. After a second glance, once they stood up, it appeared to be floorboard. One that was all burnt up and damaged, that is. As they took a more considerable look around them, however, they began to seriously doubt that they had successfully landed outside the illusion. They were in a house that had burnt to a crisp. They could even catch whiffs of scorched wood soles. They recognized that house, at least Peter did. How could he ever forget it? "Please, tell me this isn't real," he begged under his breath. "Wait, are we where I think we are?" "This is..." asked Malia. "The Hell House," he confirmed.